Welcome to the Livestream at First Unitarian Wilmington podcast. Here we will share some sermons, talks, interviews, or conversations we call life journeys, and also occasionally music. I'm Reverend Larry Piers, minister at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. If you enjoy what we are offering, please share it with a friend. Our purpose is to spark conversations and to share what we value as a Unitarian Universalist congregation with a wider community. To find out more about us, please visit our website, firstuuwilm.org. And now, welcome to this episode of Livestream at First Unitarian. Before I move into my sermon for this morning, I just want to pause and recognize, as maybe you did, how many people in our congregation volunteer in one way or another, right? Wasn't that amazing? We have an abundant supply of volunteers, but if you feel left out, as it says in the scriptures, we are preparing a place for you. Now, I'm sure most of us have heard the children's story, Chicken Little. Let me review the plot very quickly. Major plot line. The main character, Chicken Little, gets hit on the head by an acorn. She assumes the knock on her head was caused by the sky falling. Chicken Little then runs about in panic and in dread, declaring, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling." She decides she must tell the king. She organizes her other farmyard animals to accompany her to tell the king. And everyone along the way declares that the sky is falling. Well, let's feel part of the crowd for a moment. A count of three, let's say the sky is falling twice. Ready? And out of an alarm, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. Great. So their panic propels them. Their fear absorbs them. Their mindset drives them into irrational reactions. No one thinks to challenge Chicken Little's assumption. Some trace this story of Chicken Little to a Buddhist teaching story, the sound that hare heard, H-A-R-E, not H-A-I-R. In that version of the story, the hare goes into a panic when he hears the sound of fruit and nuts falling from trees and assume that it is a sign that the world is coming to an end. Immediately, his proclamation that the world is ending initiates a stampede among all the animals, herds of deer and bear and boar, buffaloes, oxen, and rhinoceroses. Just as they were about to plunge off a cliff in their panic, a lion notices what happens and roars 3 times to stop them in their tracks. The lion leads them to investigate what had actually happened to cause their panic, and reassures them that it was only the sound of fruits and nuts falling from the trees that created that noise. Indeed, it was not the end of the world. In the teaching story, Buddha often explains that in the past life he was a lion. In the teaching story, the lion becomes that part of ourselves that can keep our composure, that can differentiate between emotions and observable facts, that can regulate in the midst of panic. The lion's roar is always there within us to call us back when we take our assumptions as facts, when our mindset sets us off in erratic reactions before we even know it. These stories, I believe, have so much to convey to us now in this time that we are in. We need to access that perceptive, mindful, observer self within all of us. And when necessary, we need to call a halt to mindless reactivity that can entrap us. We need to find our lion's roar within us and among us. So let's practice. Ready? Count of 3. Give me your best lion's roar. 1, 2, 3. Ooh, that was good, but that was a practice roar. So give it one more try. 1, 2, 3. That will come in handy in the times that we are in. In a time when so much misinformation and misinterpretation of information is occurring hourly in our country, we have sometimes lost our capacity to evaluate what's really going on, to reassess our interpretations before they become viral and take us over the edge. We become a bundle of reactions driven by inner stories we may not even realize we have taken for granted. In other words, we may be living some form of the sky is falling story and not even realize it is a story. We just assume it's a fact and convince others that our mindset, our interpretation is absolute truth. In fact, we always have a choice in how to respond. At the heart of the religious traditions, even though obscured in some of its practices, is this cultivating of a way of being that we might call the contemplative way, what in the story is the lion's composure. Religion is our way of response, and we always have a choice in how to respond to what gets stirred up around us or within us. Richard Rohr, a contemporary spiritual teacher, offers this understanding of the contemplative way. He says, contemplative knowing is a much more holistic, heart-centered knowing where mind, heart, and soul and senses are open and receptive to the moment, just as it is. Just as it is. In other words, an acorn is just an acorn. The stories that we create about the acorn are the stories that we create about the acorn. And sometimes we get carried away by our stories. Can I hear an amen? Over time, contemplative practices such as meditation, reflective writing, journaling, stillness, walking meditation, listening to music allows us to recognize that centering space within us before emotions or thoughts or stories take over our field of awareness. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh offers this insight in this way. And you've probably heard this story. If you pour a handful of salt into a cup of water, the water becomes not that appealing, undrinkable. But if you pour that handful of salt into a river, people can continue to draw water to cook, wash, and drink. The river is immense And it has the capacity to receive, to embrace, and to transform when our hearts are small. When our hearts are small, our understanding and compassion are limited, and we suffer. Tending our field of awareness is essential for this time that we are in. Expanding our heart's capacity is necessary to hold all that is happening. So often our field of awareness is filled with the dense salt of information and misinformation, interpretation and misinterpretation that is often hard for us to recognize when our stories have us rather than us having our stories. Following me? We need more opportunity to hear the lion's awakening roar within us and among us when these panicked, the sky is falling messages need to be called out. These messages can occur in many contexts, in our society, in our institutions, even within ourselves. Tending our field of awareness may be the inner work for each of us. Speaking forth, the lion's awakening roar may be all of our collective work in a time of intentional chaos creating activities. So let's practice our roar again. 1, 2, 3. I knew you had it in you. Our personal lives, our social lives, our spiritual lives are impacted by our capacity to engage in these practices, tending our field of awareness, expanding our heart to include more, and speaking forth the lion's roar when we need to call ourselves or others back into awareness. Let me start with talking about our social context for a moment. I don't need to tell us, but I will, that in this country we are caught now in a social and political narrative similar to the sky is falling. When our current president entered office, he made the assessment that it is the worst economy ever. I mean, I don't know how many times the word worse is used, but that's one example. It's the worst our country has ever been. Have you heard this? And then proceeded to, in one way or another, declare that the sky is falling unless we help more of the sky fall. That was a commentary on my part. I've appreciated the perspectives offered by Ezra Klein and Thompson in their recent book, Abundance, where they point out the dilemma that we are in. As part of their analysis, they point out that we are right smack in the midst of a decline in a political order, and we haven't yet found our way forward. Consequently, we are susceptible to competing and compelling narratives, luring and lulling stories, misinformed and meandering mindsets that are causing havoc each day. Quoting Gary Gerstel, Klein and Thompson point out, and I quote, "For a political order to triumph, it must have a narrative, a story. It tells itself about the good life." That's worth repeating, you're right. For a political order to triumph, it must have a narrative, a story. It tells itself about the good life. So let's just reflect on ourselves for just a moment. How often are we day to day telling a story or a narrative about the good life? And if we aren't, what do we tend to do instead? Give me an example. Someone you know, someone in your neighborhood, someone you've heard about. What else might we do other than telling a story about a good life? Wail and despair. Isolate. Grasp for something. Complain. Complain. Be the victim. Live in fear. What did you say? Binge Netflix. Complain a lot. So recognize. Was there someone else? Drink. Hibernate. So let's recognize that we have a choice in how to respond. And the choice that might be unpracticed in us might be that choice to tell a good story, a good narrative about our future. Not to avoid what's going on, but to create something alongside of what do we want to see happen. Do you hear what I'm saying? Otherwise, we are like that herd of boar that are running off in a reactive stance to the edge of a cliff. And we need to practice our lion's roar now and then to call us back to also tell a story or a narrative, a good story about our future. Right? So we have a choice. So many of our narratives, no matter from the right or from the left, I think sound like some version of the sky is falling. They put it this way, Klein and Thompson, today's politics are suffused with cynicism and pessimism about governance because a way of living sold to us as a good and achievable is no longer good or seems no longer achievable. They argue that both the political left and the political right, quote, understand that the story that has been told by the establishments of both parties have come to an end. And they give examples from both sides of the political spectrum that come from this mindset of scarcity. Mindset of scarcity. So they point out, right-wing populism seeks power by closing doors, halting change, and venerating the businesses and dominance hierarchies of the past. Scarcity is its handmaiden. So too is the sense that governments today are weak and corrupt, and therefore that strong men are needed to see the world clearly and deliver on democracy's failed promises. That's an underlying narrative that we're seeing played out in ways that we might not have necessarily connected the dots around. Another specific example on the right, they say both Vance and Trump in the most recent political election blamed immigrants for the inadequacy of housing supply. Vance stated it this way: illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. Scarcity politics, a scarcity mindset aimed towards creating fear and hate and suspicion of those who may be unlike ourselves. Klein and Thompson also point out that liberals, hold on for a second, liberals, they practice their own version of scarcity politics. Yes, preacher, they do. Zoning regulations in liberal states and cities that restrict housing supply have increased cost far more than the recent influx of immigrants. These restrictions exacerbated an affordability crisis that was then harnessed by the right. Both right and left, in other words, have operated from a scarcity politics. And Klein and Thompson say it's a choice. I say it's a mindset. This scarcity mindset is so persuasive that it has contributed to our impasse in actually finding that narrative that will carry us forward rather than continue to lead us so close to the cliff. We don't recognize oftentimes how much we have been captured by this narrative, and that's why we need to be able to observe and to stop ourselves every now and then and say, what narrative am I currently living out? Is this based on abundance or scarcity? Although both right and left are complicit in making choices about housing, healthcare, jobs from a scarcity narrative, we've observed in these recent months of the current administration a scarcity sky is falling narrative run amok. We have a choice. And Klein and Thompson point out that Trump did not run on a compelling vision for America's future, but he had a choice. There was a choice. And I'm going to quote them. Trump could have run on bringing the Texas housing miracle to the nation. Instead, he ran on closing the border. That was a choice. He could have run on the success of Operation Warp Speed. Instead, he has disowned it as his coalition has rebuilt itself around skepticism and of scientists and vaccines. Elon Musk has led some of the most innovative companies of the modern era, but according to the earliest reports of his role in the Trump's government, he is focused on slashing what government does rather than imagining what we could do. As the truth of Doge's actual impact becomes more and more to light in recent days, we recognize how luring and delusional a narrative of scarcity can be. It can seem like you're doing something when you're cutting budgets, eliminating jobs, or reinstating jobs that you eliminated. It can seem like you're accomplishing something when you cut budget items for so-called entitlement programs and then create breaks for the already economically entitled. Do you hear what I'm saying? The real cost in actual lives around the globe of this slash approach is gradually and steadily becoming apparent. Perhaps you saw the estimates shared this week from a study at Boston University, an estimate that nearly 300,000 people have already died due to the cuts the United States has made to foreign aid. It's really hard to see this as political and not moral. It's really hard for one heart to hold so much loss. So we have to hold it together as we try to make sense of a narrative that will allow us to move forward with more compassion, more kindness, and more forthrightness when it comes to justice. The real cost in decreased capacity and established expertise is not even considered as long as you can manage to project some big numbers of budget cuts, even if it has no real basis in facts. The mindset of the sky is falling, that we are in some kind of extraordinary crisis that requires slashing, destroying, eliminating, has taken over, and many of the barnyard animals in our government have joined in the march toward the edge of the cliff, drowning out the moral implications, which are slowly and surely and sadly coming to light. We need a lion's roar to bring us back to the facts and to bring us back to our senses and to our moral sense. Let's have another lion's roar. 1, 2, 3. Slashing is easier than building. Slashing budgets is easier than building towards a possible future. There's a contrasting perspective, and I'll close with this because of our time. Klein and Thompson offer the contrasting perspective of abundance as an alternate choice to the choice we often make from a scarcity mindset. In their exploration, they frame these questions to move from a scarcity to an abundance mindset. One question is, what is scarce that should be abundant? Take a moment now and ask that question. What do you notice is scarce in our society, in our world that should be abundant? Housing, empathy, common sense, healthcare, honesty, kindness, love, access to food. So these are the kinds of questions that move us beyond that scarcity mindset, that pave the way for art to say, what do we need to create, rather than what do we need to slash? The second question they offer is, what inventions do we need that we do not yet have? What inventions do we need that we do not yet have? This is an open book exam, so what would you offer? Small housing.
Deep fake detectors for AI.
Okay, deep fake detectors for AI.
Safe energy.
Safe energy.
Moderna's new bird flu vaccine.
A new bird flu vaccine.
Pleasant, affordable, shared transportation.
Pleasant, affordable, shared transportation.
Substitute for food.
A substitute for food. Okay, so our list could go on, and some are trying to move us quickly towards snack. By asking different questions, we develop a different mindset. The alternative is a mindset of abundance that comes from a narrative of creating more good rather than merely more goods. So that's our work, to create more good, to figure out what our part as a congregation is to create more good in whatever place we create shadows in our world, in whatever place that we intersect with need and aspiration. We can live with that question this week as you're doing the dishes. What good can I be part of creating in this world?